Good morning, 828 Church. It is so good to see you in this house. And once again, shout out to 828 Church online. And welcome back to the team from Southern Africa. Woo. And thank you again to everybody for making that possible for us. It was hectic. I actually came back 2 days early, unplanned. My wife got sick, and at the back end of our trip, we were spending some time in a wildlife park, and we were almost there where we were going just before coming home. And I got word and had to kind of make a quick decision. And we were passing literally the last airport we would see on that side of Southern or South Africa, I should say more specifically. And so I just caught a ride home, and she's doing okay. She's doing better. It's been kind of a hectic health week for my family, but God's good. Come on, everybody. All time God is good. And but they did an amazing job getting themselves home. I'm not going to lie. I was WhatsApping them constantly in the group message, micromanaging their details, even though they could handle it. And then there was all sorts of flight shifts and such, and we still got them home. Which was great, but really late. So shout out to these guys for coming to church today because they had, 30 plus hours of travel. Yeah, 40. Okay, they counted on that. And hey, I've slept a solid 16 hours since Tuesday myself, so I don't know what I'm going to say today either. It's going to be fun. I can bet you that. It's going to be fun up in here. But I know I dropped Carly off at her front door at 1:30 a.m. So some of those folks probably hit the sack about 3, and they're here. How about that? And we did tell them before we left, look, if it's at all possible, we have to be here on Sunday morning because them other folk been covering for us, which we appreciate too. Thank you for what you've been doing here while we were away. And I know you were blessed because Josh obviously brought the message last week, trust and obey. That was good. So we were following along as well. In fact, I checked in. The way the timing worked for the preach that side, I got to watch 828. So last Sunday, I was speaking at a church, Hope Church in George, South Africa, which is one of our primary partners. We did 3 Sunday mornings, and then in the afternoon, I watched 828 Church online, and then preached again to end the day there. And I know it was good. And then the week before that, of course, Jacob brought a word about trust. And even just segueing already into this message this morning, just thinking trust is like, I guess if I had a life message, maybe I would have 2 or 3 that I would pick from, but trust would be a go-to for me. Like I would always, if someone said, hey man, you got 3 minutes and you're preaching, and I didn't know that was about to happen, even though I've been preaching virtually every Sunday for a very long time, I would still be inclined to lean on Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. Because, in that moment, when you're thrown into the proverbial preaching fire, it's apropos because you're preaching about the very thing you're doing. You're trusting in the Lord. You're not leaning on your own wisdom. And trust is such a big deal. And I'm so thankful that that's something God's really been pressing into our hearts in this season. And shout out to Jeremy, who's graduating and, heading into next steps and been trusting God, graduated from Hope Life and heading back to Georgia. We about to miss you like crazy, but I know this is just a huge season of trusting God, and depending on Him. And that's what God's asking all of us to do, just to follow Him faithfully and to lean into what He wills for us and to be obedient to His voice. And I think I'm always so excited when we have an opportunity to know that that's the choice we're making. Come on, like those intentional choices when you're like, okay, well, in this moment, I know I'm trusting. Because sometimes it's a little more difficult to tie it down. Am I trusting me? Am I trusting God? And when I teach about trust, I always use flying as an example, because I love it. I said this to some of you before we left, but people say, well, and I did this to Ricky when they were flying home. We were messaging, and I said, well, travel well. And he said, well, I'll try to talk to the pilots, because... But I didn't say fly well. I just was speaking about, maybe getting some rest. But they'll say, have a good flight. I hope so. Because, and people say, how long is that flight? Well, it depends. But the longer ones on this trip were 10. And I think because they got rerouted into Minneapolis, I believe that was 9. But it was long. I ended up on a direct flight on my return, which was 15 and a half hours. And, but the thing with that is that people will say, whew, I don't know how you sit in a plane that long. But occasionally we've even traveled with people when we were unaware that they hadn't flown before. And that's, then they're like, I don't think I can do this. And you're like, man, they done buckled up the doors. You might want to just pray the Lord to help you pass out real quick. Try to give you a little B.A. Baracus help right now. Yeah, I just threw a Mr. T joke, everybody. No telling what we're going to get today. No, I'm not responsible for how this goes. But, you can say, well, I'm not afraid of flying. But if you aren't flying, you're not technically trusting. Even me, I would say, I trust in airplanes. But my point in that is that when we're technically trusting, it means we're high in the sky. And I say that because when we're trusting God, it means that there are aspects, and preferably complete trust in God would mean that every part of who you are and how your life is living and what you're doing and deciding is based on who God is and what God wills for you. And that you're standing into every bit of obedience you can. Everything you know about that God would want for you, you do that. That's what trust in God looks like. And I love it when people choose to trust God. But Preston, the new baby's in the house. There you go. Well done, Mackenzie. Preston just cheered you on. But, I feel like when I get excited when I see people deciding to follow God and to trust God. But I do believe this, though. I think we've lowered the bar a little bit, if I'm completely honest. And because I think what God wants for us or wills for us is just more maybe than what we think. So if I said to you, are you trusting God? Are you following God? Are you believing in God? And I ask, what does that mean to you? That's where you find out. Maybe we've undertaught this point a little bit. We're in week 10, can you believe it, of the What If series. And I want to talk about what if we really fully surrendered our lives to Him? Like, what would that be like? I mean, fully, too. Because often when you ask, people say, well, I'm trying to do right. That's good, everybody. Don't you think that's good? It's not like it's a bad answer. I'm trying to do good, trying to do better. Everybody wants to do better. And praise God for grace and mercy, Trying to stop living into my brokenness. Maybe we would, if we had a history with church, we might even say something like, I'm just trying to stop sinning, you know what I'm saying? Like trying to stop having these habitual broken patterns in my life, and I just want to live a godly life and do the right things. That would even be a slightly more informed answer to that question. But what if more than being good was our goal? What if we went to a different place with the way we think about what it looks like to trust God and to follow God? In fact, first point for impact this morning is just this. What if we choose to be more than good? What if we choose to be His? It's just different. It's just different. Because when you choose to be His, everything about your life is set up by who God is and what God says to you about you and what He wills for you. And He wrote us a book, and Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 6:20 and said it this way: do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You're not your own. You're bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. Now, specifically in this passage in Corinthians, Paul was talking about sexual sins and different decisions that we make about purity. Whew. And I'm telling you, that message about what if we believed and told the truth is coming. I just didn't want to preach it my first week back. Help us, Lord. I didn't want to preach it right before I left, and I didn't want it to be the first message I preached when I got back, because I'm not sure if everyone's going to be pleased with me. But my plan is not for you to hear from me, but for you to hear from the counsel of God's word, and I'm about to tell the truth, just so you'll know. I try to do it every week, but I got a mandate. I'm going to try to live into it. But this passage, the preceding verses are a lot about sin that's outside the body and inside the body, and especially protecting your purity. But it applies to all of it. Another point I think to make there is just that a recognition of His ownership is huge. So rather than trying to just live a godly life, what if we saw ourselves as completely His? A takeaway, again, I'm just going to hit you quick this morning. Well, this isn't a takeaway, actually. This is today's big what if. So I've already tossed a couple, but this is sort of the driving force in this message. What if instead of trying to live a godly life, we lived our lives for God? Okay, there, I got it out. Whew. I said it. What if we lived our lives for God? Wouldn't that be different? James 4:7, James, the brother of Jesus, said, submit yourselves therefore to God. The word submit there Sometimes in Christendom, we use a word to describe this concept of giving yourself completely to God. We call it surrender. And if you were to do an open Bible search, Adam, on what surrender looks like, you would rather hear verses about maybe an enemy surrendering or someone surrendering to an enemy or something like that. But this concept of Christian surrender that we're talking about today is really submission. It's completely handing over control of your life to God, letting God decide, not even leaning into your own preferences, though I believe that God will give you preferences for the things he wills for you if you'll let him. Okay, I'll say that, and I believe that. I preach that all the time. But James was giving us some incredible instructions. So often what happens is we try to live a godly life, and it's hard. Okay, it's just hard. We're running from our sin. Like every day, we're trying to run away from our broken flesh patterns while we still actually decide for ourselves how we're going to do it. Well, that is not spiritually intelligent. So James said, rather do it this way. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil. Sure. Say no to the devil. And then look what happens. He will flee from you. Isn't that incredible? It doesn't, like, we've mixed this up in our heads. We're thinking, I'm supposed to flee from sin and wrong. And there's some truth in that too. Joseph ran out of Potiphar's house, but he was on his way to pursuing God, which he had already been doing, chasing the will of God, even in broken things that happened in his life. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, sure. And then guess who runs? He does. Wouldn't that be awesome? Like, who's running from who? I'm not running from the devil. The devil's running from me. This is different, everybody. Oh, come on, y'all. I'm going to preach either way. What if instead of trying to live a godly life, we lived our lives for God? What if that was how this looked? The subtle shift is significant. Suddenly, I'm not just trying to not sin. I'm living to please God. It's no longer what I can get away with, but what I'm walking away from because it doesn't matter to God. You know, that's not important to my life with him, and he's more important than that to me. I'm walking away from those things because I'm pursuing him and his will for me. Romans 6, verses 6 through 8 gives us some more instruction about how that works. We know that our old sinful selves were crucified with Christ so that sin might lose its power in our lives. So that Jesus did. Jesus took our sin to the cross. Thank you, Lord. Somebody say, thank you, Lord. So we're no longer slaves to sin. It didn't stop there, though. Y'all pay attention. For when we died with Christ, we were set free from the power of sin. And so Paul's saying, since that's how this worked, when we died with Christ, we know we also live with him. We didn't just die with him. We get to live with him. Come on, instead of trying to be godly, let's give our lives to God. Let's do that. I'm going to get there, Lord. Just be patient with me. D.L. Moody, one of my all-time favorite quotes, he said, the world is yet to see what God can do with someone completely surrendered to him. And D.L. Moody was a Jesus-chasing giant, got saved as an adult, and then was just one of the men who God used to usher in a great awakening in the 1850s and 60s. But God's yet to see. Well, and let's be those people who give God a good opportunity to see, for the world to see what it would look like if someone gave themselves completely to him. Colossians 3, 1 through 3. Again, Paul, there's so much in this passage I thought about just expositing it this morning. If then you've been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above. Oop, there it is. I know I was tempted. There it is. I don't even. Y'all felt that too, didn't you? That's right there. I look. If you then have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above. Not just try to get away from the things that are below. Seek. Make your life about that. Where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Literally, I taught this a few weeks ago. Set your minds on things that are above. Set your mind on it. I love that language. I love the language in that. Literally set your minds on it. Make this what you think about. You get up in the morning and you say, God, how can I follow you today? How can I live into what you will for me today? God, my life is yours today. Sacrifice and surrender yourself to him every day, and then watch God do exceedingly abundantly more than you could ever think or ask. What if? Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Let me explain it. A good example for me would be my mom and dad. I love them both. They've been with Jesus, mom now for almost 3 years, dad for 13 years. And my dad died a bit early. He had COPD and emphysema and some other things from a lifetime of smoking. And I always say, man, I'm not hating on folks that smoke, not a little bit, but it's bad for your lungs. I know you didn't need me to tell you that, but I just say that because I love people and I lost my dad earlier than I should have had to. But my dad came from a really broken history. His dad left, started a second family without divorcing his mom when my dad was only 11. And there was a lot of stuff in there that the Lord had to heal him from. But the most significant difference in my mom and my dad was my mom got up every day determined to live that day for God. And my dad was just trying to get to heaven. You know, and I love my dad. My dad's a huge, important person in my life. But there's a huge difference in how that looks and how that works. My mom was the most joy-filled and secure person that I've ever personally known. And I say that with great bias and admit the bias. And my dad was one of the most insecure, emotionally unstable, and sometimes straight up sad people, you know, and there was a lot going right in his life. But there's just a big difference in trying to run away from sin and fully pursuing God. It don't live the same way. It doesn't. And my mom she prayed at the end of the day and she prayed at the beginning of the day that everything she was and everything she had was his and that he would help her. I mean, when she went back to college, many of you know me well, know this. When I'm the youngest of 5, and when I was a sophomore in high school, she went back to college. Before that, she worked jobs that were mostly minimum wage so she could just help with the 5 kids. But then she went back to college and she got her degree in teaching and then a graduate degree in teaching, a master's, and then she taught till she retired. But even as a teacher, I mean, she was always on assignment, somebody. Always on assignment. There's just a big difference in the way that lives when you see somebody that gives themselves fully to God. And then Galatians 2:20, another verse or passage I could have exposited for this message this morning. Paul wrote to the Galatians and explained it this way. He said, I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I that live, but Christ who lives in me. In the life I live in the flesh, because I know I'm still walking around in this stuff. I get it. The life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. That's it. That is our mode of operandi right there. That's how we do it. I'm crucified with Christ every day. I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I got to walk out this door and live. I got to interact with my family and my friends and my calling. I'm crucified with Christ. I don't decide for me. I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. Yeah, come on now. Not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who incidentally has done me so right? Who loves me. He didn't ask me to lay down my life until he had laid down his. So yeah, we were just in Southern Africa, and speaking of flying, my. Almost every bit of our travel was challenged. And thanks again for praying for us, and thank you for the extra giving. There were many of you who gave above and beyond to cover the costs of ticket overages and all sorts of things, and it was so necessary, but so valuable and so worth it. We got trucks that weren't sufficient for what we were doing because the trucks we normally rent had been rented because there were COVID catch-ups from these companies, and we took some trucks that didn't belong in the bush, and come here in the immediate future, we'll have a night where we'll get together and we'll tell you stories and we'll shoot some videos and we'll just talk about it. I'm so proud of the team. They did fabulously well. But right from the beginning, one of the things that constantly changed for us, Jason, was that the people that we normally go into the bush with were just not able to go with us. There was a litany of reasons. There was sickness, and there was some shifts in what was going on with the school, so the person who was going to go couldn't go. And we landed up with some people that I barely knew or didn't know at all, and we headed into a place that's deeper and more distant than we've ever gone before, in a place called Matete. I showed you guys that on the map, and so there was just so many challenges like that. But the guy that we were there to work with is a guy named Maston, and I got a picture for you. And when I was praying about this message this morning, I thought of him. This is us crossing a ferry. We crossed several ferries, and they don't all have good ramps or very impressive engines either. I'll just be honest with you. But they all worked and got us across the croc-infested rivers, and it was awesome. But this guy, Maston, we'll leave that photo up for a while. I'll talk a bit about him. But he is area director for this province called Matete that we're working in, and has been for a minute. Now, Maston is in his late 20s, I think, and there was another guy there named Bosco, who's just a Jesus giant who turned 32 while we were there. Maston has a wife and a small child, and he works literally for Village of Hope and what we call village ministry. So some of you know I'm on that board, and I get village ministry updates on WhatsApp every day, every single day. I see a lot from this guy. But Maston came to Jesus in 2018. That's 4 years ago, everybody. How long you been walking with God? You know, I felt so challenged just by how he's living his life. And basically what he does is his assignment is he's pastoring pastors, so he does a lot of evangelism. But there have been 24 churches previously planted in that area, and after we left, and you're going to think this isn't real, but 3 new churches were planted while we were there. And I mean, the team just crushed it. And they were legit too. Like, these people were like, we're starting on Sunday. And, you know, he's been working this ground, okay? So one man sows and another man reaps. So we came in. But some of it, man, they hadn't anybody there in a minute. One of those places was just objecting to Hope Church and the work of church reproduction in that area. So 3 churches were started. 3 were restarted because during this tough season from COVID and such, some of them lost their leadership and had closed, but they were all meeting again. So it was 6 new churches happening on Sunday. We divided and preached in 3 different churches, which was awesome. But Maston spends 2 weeks there and then 2 weeks off. And it's far for him. Like, it's a 9-hour walk from where he camps to the ferry. 9-hour walk. And he catches a ride back to the Village of Hope. And he didn't even bat an eye at that. But he got saved in 2018 because some guys in Mongu, which is the third world city where the Village of Hope and the Zambia Project is located, they had come out of an outreach. And instead of going home and taking a hot bath, they decided to go down to the more dodgy areas in this third world city and evangelize. And they found this dude. And they start talking to him about Jesus. And he has a hectic, broken testimony I don't have time to tell. But his family was broken, and he was living with an uncle, and he was doing drugs, and they found him. He, at one point, was on the 20 and under national soccer team, and so they invited him to church, and he didn't come, but they found him the next week at a soccer outreach they were doing, and they said, "You're that guy. You said you would come to church." And so that next week, he came to church. And those guys deserve some radical props too, by the way. Some of you know the guys. That was Muyunda, that was Banks, those guys that we've worked with for years. And they led this dude to Jesus. And then just started pouring in and discipling. And now 4 years later, married to an awesome Jesus lady with a newborn baby, 2 weeks of every month. He walks deep into the bush. I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I. What if? Does that work in America? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it should. It should. Does that kind of surrender work in America? Yes. Yes. Most definitely. And then I'm just going to let those guys scroll some pictures from the team that were there. I'll tell more Maston stories in another day. But just some of the different pictures from, I think there's a picture of Angie praying for someone. This was a special needs child. And the people there were taking care of her. That lady goes to Hope Church in Wilderness Heights. And so I've been in her house and prayed for them many times. And they're loving Arden, our own Arden Moshicano, who I can't get to whisper in this house, spoke in church. Now, that's amazing, and that's mission. Just keep them scrolling, man, and I'll just kind of, and Anton there wearing his they love the 828 shirts. That was crossing a different river into the bush, and I'll just let you scroll through them. I'm not going to try to hang up on them, but just watching, I mean, and that praying for that lady in that moment was so amazing, because we had shared the gospel, and she couldn't get over to where we were. And the whole time I was sharing, I knew we needed to go find her and pray for her, and it was so priceless to get to do so. And all there was a 23 and under right there. That was the 23 and under crowd, and they killed it. Yeah, just keep moving, man. I'm just going to comment on them as I see them. That was one of the Bush churches. I think that's where Angie and Ricky spoke on Sunday morning at Jules, one of the Bush churches, and that was another different one we were at. I think I put that picture in twice because I was sleepy. And there's me and Maston. That church was so long, it looked like an ark. I was like, what did y'all build, an ark? Man, this is cool. But I want to say this as they finish scrolling those pictures. Just keep going. But I want you to understand this. We got to see amazing things. Why? Because the surrendered life is a front row seat. Another takeaway for us. The surrendered life is a front row seat to the nature and character of God himself. And I'm determined. I've always been determined, and I'm always more determined to live that here. That's not meant just for there. It's not. Consider this, what we get to see. He took our sin. He took sin on for us, and every day, this is what I know about Jesus. I wrote this because I wanted to say it the way it hit my heart when I was flying home. He took sin on for us, and every day he climbs down into the deepest, darkest places to love broken humanity like only he can. And I want to be there. I want to be there with him. There's a story from years ago about Mother Teresa, the famed Sisters of Mercy in Calcutta. And people would come through and see and sometimes serve. And there were some young ladies that had gotten off a train, and the sisters had met them there. They're coming through to do a Catholic mission. And I'm going to tell you something. Theology is a big deal, but your compassion is more important than your theology. Just give you a little heads up. And the theology matters, and we're going to work on it. All right, but that compassion is a big deal. And this one young lady saw her. They were there, and there was someone in the ghetto, just like in the ditch. And Mother Teresa had been down, and a couple of the other sisters to help them. And the one lady was whispering to her friend, and she said, it's just so hard to imagine ministry in that kind of filth. And she said, I wouldn't do that for $1 million. And the way the story goes, I wasn't there, was that Mother Teresa looked up and said, neither would I. We're talking about doing things that are priceless, and they're precious, and they're sacred. And when we walk in those things, I feel like we get to live into that space. And many of you know this space better than me. But I feel like we get to live in that space with those two disciples after the resurrection of Christ. And Jesus manifested to them, but they didn't recognize him until he was ready to go. And they said, didn't our hearts burn within us? And there's a passion that's meant for us that we only find when we live our lives for God. Now, do you hear what I'm saying? Because I feel like that can be cliche too. When we live our lives for God, I'm live for God. Okay, what does that mean? I'm back to the beginning as I look toward the ending. What does that mean? Does that mean to try to beat sin? Because, I mean, that's a good idea. Sin destroys us and our destiny, so try to avoid that. But I don't think you can unless you give yourself to God. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Right? What is? I'm going to live for God. I'm going to live my life for God. What does that mean? Be careful. What does it mean? Because I think it means everything. That's what I think. And I think you're only going to live into purity and holiness when you give your life completely to God. When your life becomes about whatever God needs and wants from you. And you say, well, boy, that's next level sacrifice. Sure it is, but do you know anything or understand anything about return on investment? Because I'm going to tell you, God will give you more than you can give him every single time. Again, exceedingly abundantly more than you can think or ask. I see too many Christians floundering without any real sense of purpose, peace, or joy. I'm tired of it. Instead of trying to live a godly life, what if we literally live our lives for God? One of the most amazing things, I mentioned it, and I'll share this story quickly, and then I'll land this thing. But there was this, I mentioned this one grumpy Induna, which just means tribal elder. And a few years ago, many years ago, they had come through and tried to plant churches in his area, and he was resistant. And then in 2018, a group had come through, and he just would have nothing to do with them. There was a place that they could camp, but he was going to charge them for it. He's trying to have ownership of land that he really doesn't have ownership of, and just saying no, and then fighting with the other leaders, and just resisted the spread of the gospel or planting of any churches in that area. And the guys, Maston and Anton, that we're working with, they made this plan to go far away on Monday. We had already been pounding it. We were running out of diesel in our trucks. We had literally, on the Tuesday, we had a 12-hour drive. Ended up being a 12-hour drive across some of the worst bush I've ever driven in. The truck that I was driving was supposed to be a 4x4, but landed up being a 2x4, which we didn't notice. Had a snorkel. They tricked me. I don't think they meant to. And then it had a diff lock, so I made it by miraculous redneck skill and the grace of God get into the bush. But then the diff lock broke. So they're wanting to go out, and I'm like, guys, I just don't think we can. I mean, we're going to dog this truck out of here somehow, but I don't think we can. And so we ended up going to another place that was closer, and we landed up in this grumpy Induna's village on accident. Accident. Put some air quotes around that. Because if you endeavor to do the will of God, God will get you there. You don't even have to be great at it, figuring it out. Just really want to follow God and watch God work. So we're sitting there, and Maston's asking, so which one of these guys did Induna, this one or this one? They said, no, it's that one. He asked the guy's name, and then the guy told his name, and Maston's face just kind of went, because he's heard about this guy, but he hasn't. And I've been just being super gregarious, Ron. Like, I'm talking to the dude about crocodiles. I want some crocodile stories, and I'm like chumming it up with this guy who has previously been like, stay away. And I'm like all up in his grumpy grill. I don't even know. By this time, we've already made friends. Playing with babies, smashing cassava leaves, and the guy says, I'm the guy that has resisted, but now you're back anyway. And I won't resist anymore. I made a mistake. Can we please have Hope Church here? Anywhere you want to plant, we won't fight anymore. Anywhere you'll bring it. We've seen the way God is blessed across the Smambola Plain, which is where we were camping. I'm just saying, what if? Wouldn't you like to see it? I mean, I didn't even know. I mean, I'm getting messages, this is the greatest thing ever. I thought the croc stories were cool. I mean, I did talk about Jesus and seeking first the kingdom, but I didn't know what I was doing, but God did. And then even on my flight home, which wasn't planned to work the way it did, as I said, Karen fell sick. And I was concerned it was another kidney stone and sepsis. And I'm flying home, and normally when I travel that side a lot when it's just me, and I have all these epic conversations, but with the team, I always book our seats together, which now I'm questioning the wisdom of that. Because every time I don't, we end up with divine appointed conversations. And I had an incredible conversation on my 15-and-a-half-hour flight, which, you talk in the beginning, you take about a 14-hour break, and then you talk at the end. Because even I don't want to talk that long. And I don't need that long to talk about Jesus, y'all. I don't. But it was fabulous. I ended up talking to this guy, and then I talked to his parents when we got off. He was telling us about you, and we're going to download the app, and I hope they did. And then on my last flight, I landed up sitting next to a guy, and I just did the normal things I do to introduce a conversation. And then I was planning on taking a nap if I could. And this guy asked me a follow-up question. because I'd introduced the idea of God casually. Where are you going? Rhetorical or return question, where are you going? Where are you coming from? That kind of thing, which leads to, yeah, we were just. And then he's like, sits there for a second, and he says, I'd walked away from faith, but lately I've been reinvestigating my faith. He said, what does your faith in God look like in your everyday life? That's a fabulous question. I mean, my eyes were about half closed, and I said, that's a fabulous question. And so we talked beautifully. I hope you're watching today, Eric. It was awesome. It was a blessing to me too. Following Jesus completely allows us to see his compassion more clearly. I'm fascinated at how deeply God cares about us and others. And again, not just in the bush, but to want for us to go that far. It took 5 days to get there, everybody. It took 5 days. And it was worth every second. It was worth every dollar. It was worth every difficulty, because Jesus said it was. Do you understand? When did the church become so unfamiliar with inconvenience that it can't follow God in compassion anymore? You'll be fine. We'll be fine. 1 Corinthians 10:24, I quote it all the time, 23 and 24. The word Paul wrote was, run your race. And he said, don't you know in a race all the runners run, but not all win a prize. But he said, run your race in such a way. And usually when I preach that, I'm talking about your race. I preached it a couple of weeks ago. I really hammered it. Listen, I'm not saying if you run your race, you won't get tired, but if you try to run someone else's race, you'll die trying. Something like that. And I preached that, and that's true. But that's not even the direction I'm coming at from today. Because as I was flying home, I felt like the Lord just reminded me, run your race. And it was just run. Don't sit on the sideline your race. Don't lackadaisically, I don't really give a rip about your race. Run. Run. Run your race. Run your race. Ready, set, let's go! There's lots of things we can give to God when it comes to giving God everything we got, our attitudes and our actions. Should work on those. Me. Time, talent, and treasure, we talk about that a lot. But give God you. Every day. All of it. This is my job. Okay, well, this job's not about my job. So what is it about? Lord, help me know and see. Because I'm going to follow you. Because it's just clearly not about just making money. Right? And there's a line in a Rich Mullins song. I'm going to wrap with this. I've loved for years. Some of my friends from Hope Church, Georgia, will watch later. I meant to share this last week. Sorry about that. We taught last week about prayer and fasting. Shout out to all the guys that watch from Livingston too. Appreciate you guys. I know you are there. We practically have an 828 location in Livingston, Zambia. We rocked up at this one spot, and a guy came out and he said, "Man, what if we put God first?" And there was 4 or 5 other dudes. Yeah. I don't know. Where'd you hear that? You guys are epic. We're going to start calling you 828 Livingston. I'm going to let you know right now. But the Rich Mullins song says this about surrender. Surrender don't come natural to me. I'd rather fight you for something I don't really want than take what you give that I need. I'm going to do that again. Surrender don't come natural to me. I'd rather fight you for something I don't really want than take what you give that I need. I've beat my head against so many walls, but now I'm falling on my knees. Come on, worship team. Join me out here. Stop fighting for something you don't even really want. and give everything you've got to the God who knows you better than you know yourself and loves you more than you love yourself? And then watch God do work only God can do? Come on, somebody. Remember Jesus when he was on earth? One of my favorite stories, he was doing ministry to this forgotten woman at a well. Ooh, that's the best scene from The Chosen. Oh, I love it. I digress. And his disciples come up. They had gone to town to get some food. And they came up. And they're trying to get him to take some, you should eat. They like interrupt his conversation. You should eat. He's talking to this lady, man. I mean, he's doing big work. And they're like, no, you should eat. And then in verse, I don't know which verse, but they said, Rabbi, eat. Aren't you going to eat? He told them, I have food to eat you know nothing about. And the disciples were puzzled. Did somebody make him a sandwich? What in the world happened? Where did he get food? Who could have brought him food? And then Jesus said, the food that keeps me going. Come on, somebody. Preach with me just a little bit. The food that keeps me going is that I do the will of the one who sent me. Finishing the work he started. I want to be like Jesus when I grow up. That's who I want to be like. Surrender. Sounds like losing, but it's winning. When with your heart you're giving your very life to God. Try to save it and you'll lose it. Give it to him. He won't refuse it. Even if your previous efforts left you feeling like a fraud. He sees a work in progress. So let progress rule the day. Every step with Jesus brings change. That's sure to stay. He took my life and made it more than I ever dreamed he would. And if I had 2 lives to give, I'd give them both if I could. The key, to give the keys to the one who knows you best. Surrender every single second. Everything. And nothing less. Are we together on it?